Thanks for joining me for a Kick Up the Arts. I am Nicola Meehan and I am in conversation with one of our most thrilling writers and humans on this special live episode, not for the first time. Michael Pedersen's the Edinburgh makar and a veritable cultural livewire whose glorious poetry collections include the Cat Prince and Oyster. His prose calling card, Boyfriends, was published to huge acclaim in 2022 and the paperback edition of his magical debut novel, Muckle Flugga, is out now. It is stunning and tender, it's a beacon of hope, it is brimming with love and life and nature. It's kindled by friendship, coddled in knitwear, rooted in landscape and charged by starlight. To celebrate all of that, we caught up with a lovely crowd at the equally lovely Bookmonger in Bearsden. Thank you so much if you came along and kept us company. What a night we had. Just before we get to the chat, I'm going to be back with the Bookmonger in conversation with the brilliant Damian Barr. That's about the two Roberts. Although we are going to break out of the bookshop for that, we're holding it at Glasgow's Royal College in St Vincent Street. That's on September the 25th. And before that, Michael Pedersen and I have loads of events separately but always together in spirit at the Edinburgh International Book Festival, and you should come pretty much, in fact entirely, to all of them. I'm going to list them at the end of our chat, but I do want to insist that you join me for a Kick Up the Arts in the Spiegel tent at the Book Festival on August 25th with live music and conversation from Kirsten Innes, Catherine Joseph and Lomond Campbell. For now though, to the Bookmonger on a summer's evening with Michael Pedersen and Muckle Flugga.
You're going to do us a little reading, I think, to kick things off, aren't you?
I thought so. I wanted to introduce you to the book and certain ideals behind it, and then me and Nicola can just sort of hit the ground running. All the smutty stuff's been covered. We've pushed how far we can go into the delicate spots. But Muckle Flugga is not me trying to say motherfucker by innuendo and still have great bookshops put it on the shelves in front of young vulnerable eyes. It is in fact a very real place. It's an island right up in the north of Shetland. In fact, it used to be the UK's most northerly inhabited island when the census still deemed lighthouse keepers to live there. They've since automated the lighthouse, but we're going back to a point in time where it's still very much a peopled place on the island of Muckle Flugga. Now, just to give you an idea of the extremity of that island, if you were lying in the bulb room, the gallery room of that lighthouse and staring off into the abyss, asking some big questions of the darkness, you would be closer to the North Pole than you are to London, which gives you an idea as just how really north you are. And I guess a lot of the challenges and tumults and beauties and boons that would come with living up in such a place. Now, inhabiting Muckle Flugga at the point in time we encountered it is a tumultuous lighthouse keeper called the Father, known only as the Father. He's half in love with the world and half in hate with it. It's how he feels about himself when he looks in the mirror. Yet he's this beautifully bifurcated being. He believes in the sanctity of casting out that beam into the darkness, rallying against those forces and offering those lost out there on tumultuous waters a glimmer, a glister of hope that people care about them getting home to their loved ones. Now his otherworldly son Us, he's expected to take over the reins of the lighthouse. Yet Us is a deeply artistic being of softer deportments, and he's not sure if he wants to do that. He's asking some big questions of himself. Not only do we find him in a delicate moment because of that decision, but his mother has just died. And so the Father and Us are trying to work out how they exist in each other's company again, how they perdure, how they learn to understand each other. She was the conversational carousel that connected them, and they're a little lost in the wilderness because of that. So to disrupt the algebra of their already disrupted living, I've sent a writerly dandy from Edinburgh up to that island. I'm not sure where I got the idea for such a character. His name is Firth. And he arrives on the island full of a colourful cravat collections, bravado, braggadocio, and Us thinks he might be the answer to every question he's just learning how to ask of himself. But what we don't know about Firth is that a couple of days before that, he was actually hanging off the side of a bridge. He felt he had no value left in this world. Worse than that, he felt he was a pernicious human being that was going to cause harm to those around him. But I didn't want you to get caught up in the bog of what brought him up there. In fact, right at the start of the book, you meet him coming back down from that bridge, clawing his life back from the ashes, so that every gulp of air, every moment, every hour he continues to exist is actually in defiance of death. And his whole life becomes an anthem of survival. Not flawless, still imperfect, but he's decided to go on living, and that's enough. And now I couldn't leave Us alone to make those big decisions. Firth gets obsessed with his talent. The father is obsessed with him taking over the lighthouse. Everyone's tugging at his emotions, trying to get him to do something that they think is best for him. And I thought, this young man, he needs a life coach. He needs a confidant. He needs someone who can keep him steering in the right direction during these difficult times. I thought, who would this kid want? Well, he would want his favourite writer, the writer Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote such books as Jekyll and Hyde, Kidnap, Treasure Island, A Child's Garden of Verses. The problem was, at the point in time of writing this, Stevenson was dead. And then this is the beauty of writing into the fictional realms, springing out of non-fiction and into poetry. I thought maybe in fiction that's not a problem. So I've exhumed and I've brought back from the dead the writerly dandy Robert Louis Stevenson, and I've gifted him to Oos as a life coach and confidant. But the problem is he's sort of half useful and half useless. Most of the time he wants to do hat tricks with his lilac felt fedora and regale Oos about past conquests of his back when he was in his living flesh. But he does deeply care about him. He loves him and he's invested in his future. Now, I'm aware that's not exactly an elevator pitch for a novel, but I'm working on it.
You didn't even look at your notes.
No. Well, that was just the intro. So, so I'm going to give you a very short reading now. I call it a tapas reading. Seen fancy novelists, they open up the books and they read for 10 minutes and they close it. Coming through the poetry, the performance world, I thought that's not good enough for the sexy people of the Bookmonger and the listeners of A Kick Up the Arts. They need something better than that. So I've assembled it together into what I consider a mixtape version of that reading. All the coolest bits that introduce us to all the excitement still to come. You know, if any of you made mixtapes, you'd put all your favourite songs on it. You'd steal some song choices of people who knew stuff about music, like Nicola, and then you would give it to someone you knew in the hope that they would give you credit for those music choices and dance with you at the disco the following week. This is my version of that style of reading. I'm not sure that's how Salmon Rushdie does it, but... On the island of Muckle Flugga sits one of the most formidable lighthouses on this or any planet. Its wild peril of light is capable of guiding boats and their humans to safety in spite of all manner of storms, gales and hails, not to mention whirlpools, pirates, straying submarines and a litany of other hunters of the aquatic deep. As for the more malevolent presences the light keeps at bay, the less said the better. On account of being charged by starlight, the beam of Muckle Flugga lighthouse is rumoured to be infinite in its luminosity. The great beam, which starts the size of a modest meteor, if mishandled, has been known to dwindle to little more than the circumference of a gold coin. That might sound useless, but to a poor soul lost in a thick har or pernicious squall, even a glisk of light can prove enough to rope the way home. It is both a simple and a complicated life for Oos and the father on Muckle Flugga. Mercurial as the moon might make it, night after night that lighthouse tears its silhouette into the horizon, taking the gloaming to task for the sins it's covering over. The same stars that reflect dreamily in Muckle Flugga's window panes are those that send ships spinning in circles until the sea's ready to claim them and all life on board. Oos. Once again, Oos is attempting to count the innumerable miles of North Sea stretched out in front of him. The vast expanse that sprawls beyond Outstack and eventually becomes the Arctic Ocean, where the deep icy water is as queer and unconquerable as the surface of a distant planet. He's perched atop a boulder, a throne-like seat chiselled into the rock face. A gaggle of puffins make mischief around him. One has shat on his lap, delighted with the result. Another nestles up to his rib cage, either itching or snuggling. It's difficult to decipher the body language of birds, not to mention puffins are masters of deception. Sneaky wee bastards. But it's not in the book and is often the best joke of the reading, so I deeply regret it more and more as the time canters on. To his right, a slender figure in a velveteen jacket, riding boots and a lilac felt fedora. His companion, the ethereal and invisible to all, Robert Louis Stevenson, RLS to friends. Oos stops sketching, crunches, closed his eyes and begins chewing on a question like a twist of tough jerky. Do you miss being alive? He finally spits out after some wrangling. Oh, I don't miss being alive, RLS responds without hesitation, by which I mean I don't miss being within the prison of a body, but I do miss being amongst the living, and I was alive a lot. The father. Sort of modelled my Robert Louis Stevenson voice on how the actor Jack Lowden does it on the audiobook. His is a lot better, being a pro, but it's given me some useful tips. To those who never knew him before, the father is notorious for his temper, a rage labelled a danger to other bodies. He has been called bitter, hostile and violent, an aggressor fuelled by flame, by smoke. To those who have glimpsed his tenderness, that did know him before, thriving and in love, he is an incorrigible curmudgeon, all caught up in knots, a fighter plain with his engine out, the pilot embracing the fall. They say the father propagates pain, that he's made a loyal pet of it, trained it by firm-handed scalding to do exactly as he says, all discipline, no cuddles. They say the father is a traitor to his kin, the harvesters, the lost wanderers. He has brothers and sisters who have learned to forget his name. The father once met a pretty man who said, years from now, we are nothing more than the echoes of the kindnesses we cast, and it moved him deeply. He has since denied being stirred by such slop. The father is a cruel, brave man. He struck braver men, embraced crueler. The father is strong, yet unwell, and unfortunately handsome. The father charges himself a sentinel, twisted, flawed, dreadful, but not faithless, never faithless. It's faith that keeps him fighting. He's sacrificed everything to be here. His family gone, betrayed, lost. The mother gone, betrayed, lost. The dead invisible, but far from silent. Us, his son, will learn by his teaching. He cannot fail him. He cannot.
Oh, can we just have a cheer for that, by the way? Whoa. High-class readings. How apt in the wonderful Bookmonger as well. I love that. It's very on brand. Charcuterie readings.
I'm reaching into the charcuterie boards. Plus, I choose, that reading's a lot longer, and I choose little bits from the characters as well. So it's veritable tapas.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
Jokes are the same, but they are
you need the consistency as well, right? That's the thing. It's a bit of both. There are so many aspects of this book that are a dance or a waltz or a sort of dalliance between dark and light, between poetry and prose, and also even effectively Muckle Flugga. We'll start with that, will we? This incredible, magical and yet real landscape, and why it was important to be there with the lighthouse and the island, and you'd been there, but it's like nowhere else as well. It's fantastical, but it's rooted in the ground.
Yeah. Do you know what? I was looking for a sibling edifice. I would have been happy writing poems and little bits of non-fiction from now until forever. I wanted to be wrestled into action by a novel. I read more novels than anything else. Don't tell the poets. And I've always sort of worshipped at the altar of fiction, but I didn't really want to sit down and purposely write a book. I wanted to be wrangled into action by it. And it took a while. And it took having written boyfriends about this sort of fierce, beautiful friendships in my own life and how much they sustained me to know I then wanted to take that into the fiction world, to find a little bit of somebody else's friendship, to rekindle some of my own romantic friendships, but to transpose that into a new sort of brilliant, buoyant conversation. And boyfriends, I wrote most of it in this amazing tower in Northern Ireland called the Curfew Tower. 200-year-old watchtower, owned but with a veritable dungeon in the belly of it, owned by artist provocateur Bill Drummond. And when I knew I was going to basically jump out of non-fiction into fiction, but stick with the romantic friendship theme, I needed to find a sibling building to put this friendship in. And if it was going to be back in Scotland, it had to be in a lighthouse. I love these lighthouses, the intensity of them, the romance in them, the lost profession of them, and the sort of folklore and mysticism of them. So I essentially went on a lighthouse trail to try and find the right one. I thought it would be one much closer to home. And then Bill Drummond intervened again, and he invited me on a trip with him up to Unst, which is now the UK's most northerly inhabited island after they automated the lighthouse. And he was screening a film of his, and me and Kevin went up with Noriki and did some stuff. And there was a beautiful Shetland poet called Roseanne Watt that read some words. And a guy came along to the show and he said, look, I would like to invite you for brunch tomorrow. I live in quite an interesting building. And we came along to the show. We were staying in this sort of weird old decommissioned RAF base. It was pretty, you know, eerie and spooky. So we wanted to get out of there. Free brunch sounded good. So we turned up at this Bill Drummond fan's house, and he'd laid out a nice spread. And it turned out the building he was in was Muckle Flugga Shore Station. It was where the keepers were when they were off duty. And it's brilliantly in between the two headlands, so you can't see the lighthouse when you're in it. So I guess when they were on duty, they were on duty. They weren't staring at this building like the last giant at the end of the earth, thinking of the version of themselves that's there. They were able to clock off. And when I just saw it and heard the story of it, the Stevenson, Robert Louis Stevenson connection, I couldn't see these characters anywhere else. And I just carried them and that island with me.
You mentioned, I loved the phrase you just used there, the last giant at the end of the earth, because there's something incredible about, like, the idea of a lighthouse. In one way, it completely and utterly kind of represents solitude, right? You think of them as being quite lonely, and even the lighthouse keeper, the notion of it being a person of solitude. At the same time, it's utterly about companionship, because it's there to kind of steer those who are near it to safety. And again, that sort of dalliance within the book of solitude and friendship are so closely intertwined, aren't they?
Yeah, you know, the lighthouse is this sort of broken being. It could be, it's a haunted vessel in some respects, yet at the same time, it's the lamppost of the ocean. It's the lamppost of the whale road, and it's shooting out that beam is almost like it's a life-saving device. It's so these ships aren't crashing against the shore, and it's so they know where they're going. After stars and celestial navigation, it was one of the biggest lifesavers of the sea. So although these quite interesting individuals were drawn to that profession, they would have to be away from everyone they loved for long periods of times and be off radar for long periods of times. At the same time, they were doing something which is nearly, you know, philanthropic, altruistic. You sacrifice so much of your life to be there. And I knew I had to write a lighthouse keeper that was drawn to that was full of both the ferocity of that profession, but also the sort of hidden tenderness alongside it. And it's so that, I mean, now that all the lighthouses have been automated, it's so romantic to think of those notions and all the questions you can answer that abyss. But then you think about those caught in the orbit of it. You decide to be a lighthouse keeper if you have a son. You're a lighthouse keeper's son, and that's quite the life that you've signed up for, whether you like it or not. And Oust was definitely caught in the crossfires of some of the father's big decisions. Plus the history of the lighthouses. It's getting a bit geeky now.
Loving this.
But like the original lighthouses essentially were like kerosene lamps, and before that were like bonfires, essentially bonfires on the cliffs. And they prevented ships wrecking by like 70% in the first year that they assembled them all. But actually the wreck harvesters, the wrecking communities that would live off the spoils of these shipwrecks, took the lighthouses as a sort of blasphemous sign and a blasphemous intervention of God's will. They said God was crashing these ships on purpose to reward these travelling wreckers for their fealty, for their worship, and they would live off the spoils. They would build their houses from the wood. They would trade the cargo. They would feed the food to their children. So they actually tore down a lot of the early manifestations of the lighthouses, and it was this really violent, risky profession to be a keeper in the early stages of when lighthouses popped up onto the cliffs. And of course, the father is sort of imbued with the history and the spirit of all that.
Yeah, quite. You just said there that you had these characters, and once you kind of recognised the potential of Muckle Flugga and the wonderful notion of this lighthouse, that they couldn't be anywhere else. So I'm assuming, therefore, that the characters were already existing in your mind. And I wonder, because it's so brilliant, I don't know how many of you read the book, but the way in which our wonderful dandyish RLS, Robert Louis Stevenson, kind of comes into and comes out of the life of us. And I don't want to call him a ghost, because I don't necessarily know if that's what he is. I don't even really want to call him a spirit. He is there, right? He's as physical a presence as anyone else. Is that a bit like what it's like with you and the characters as they're coming to life in your own imagination? They were there anyway to some extent.
Yeah, I think so. You keep close company with them. You know, some writers think they're method writers, and they think they become their characters themselves. They eat what they eat. They think their thoughts. They try and go sort of full-on immersive experience. I never felt that. I regressed to the annoying younger sibling each of these characters never had, and I followed them around with that sort of wide-eyed wonder face on, trying to get in with their gang, asking them questions, intruding and eavesdropping upon all their personal moments, trying to follow them into the bathroom, everything that goes on, until eventually each of them had had enough of me. So I never felt I became these characters, but I was definitely surrounded with them. And I wrote the first draft of the novel really intensely. I'd been carrying the story ever since Boyfriend, the story of these two friends that come together and how their friendship was intensified by the setting, and it sort of built around them, and then about the lighthouse, and then about that big decision. And I carried the story line around in my head for about 6 months, but I did it a weird way. I did it as a document of characters, location, happening. So it was almost like a script synopsis. Because I'd been doing some scripting over the end of lockdown with a director friend of mine, Robert McKillop, who did things like Guilt and Ludwig. He's doing the new Slow Horses, but we didn't both have as much going on during the lockdown period. So we'd meet up in the park and flesh up this piece of like script synopsis for a movie treatment. And I'd never written a novel, and I was sort of flying by the seat of my pants, but I felt like I had to do it at this point in time. These characters were just incessant, merciless. So I wrote characters, location, happening, planned it all out, because I knew that kept me back from writing any of the poetic description, which was going to come, and any of the dialogue. It was like the driving engine of a story. It was the exact antithesis of the way that I wrote poetry and sort of florid prose. And then I thought, if I get that story working, and I get almost like the journey or the quest that we're going on with these characters nailed down, when I actually sit down to write chapter 1, page 1, I feel like I'll fly through it. And I did. I wrote it in a month of January. I blocked off the full month. I lied to people, told them I was away doing a residency, headed home.
You were in your own head.
And I was in my own head. And I just sat there, and I'd write sort of like 10 to 4 during the day, and then I'd go like a big epic walk, do some exercise, eat some nice food, and I'd come back and edit 7 till 9 at night. And I did that intensely for a month. And by the end of the month, I had the first draft.
Wow. Okay.
So I always say Muckle Flugga is a script synopsis for a script that never got written, for a movie that never got made. That's how I wrote the novel. And they don't teach you on creative writing courses, neither should they. But it worked for me, and I don't know any other way.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And the other thing is, you're saying all that, and also it's a novel, and yet it's absolute poetry as well. There are so many moments in it, and the economy of it, of language, and the utter love affair, lifelong, that you have with language is just absolutely vivid on the pages. So you have Muckle Flugga because that's a place, okay, in every realm that exists. What's in a name then of the characters? Because we have the father, we have the mother. You can name who you want to name from them.
So every character, in a sense, is named after a body of water. Ouse is named after the great River Ouse down near sort of Cambridgeshire in Yorkshire. Firth is named after the Firth of Forth. Figgy is a bit more cryptic. She's named after the Fig at Burn in Portobello, where I grew up in the north of Edinburgh. Even the father and the mother have bodies of water's names hidden under those banners. But because the father's not denying so much of himself, I've not allowed him to reveal his name to you, and the mother's no longer with us, so it's hidden away. I didn't think I could rename Robert Louis Stevenson. I've upset the Stevenson academics enough by bringing him back from the dead and inventing my own dialogue for him. But some writers think we have spirit animals. You go to Philip Pullman and these demons and that. I think we have spirit bodies of waters, lochs, burns, rivers, bits of ocean. Oxbow Lake, that's always a popular one for the geography students. But the way they swell, the way they change in the seasons, the temperament of them, the like rushing torrents of them breaking their banks, I think we can find a spirit of body of water. And I kept thinking about and I've often thought that way, but never really articulated it. The first collection I did ends with a poem called Water Features about the breakup of this relationship, and one becoming the river and one becoming the oxbow. And it's just these sort of seafaring poems have been so constant with me. Years ago, when we were doing one of the Neurikis, we had Margaret Atwood join us for one of them, and she got asked, "What's your favourite element of nature?" And she was like, "A peat bog. I am a peat bog." And then she just talked brilliantly about different types of bogs for 10 minutes straight.
I love it.
And I think the person was asking her a question, trying to like throw her off, and just got this TED talk on bogs. And I couldn't stop thinking about what bog I would have been, and then what other bodies of water I would have been. So that one's almost with thanks to Margaret Atwood.
Right, brilliant. Okay. And also, once you've gone down that route, there are so many other lovely resonances within it. I mean, again, it's surrounded by water. It begins in the water. It begins with a bridge. The island is surrounded by water. There's a lot of salt water, obviously tears and all sorts as well, but there's also so much about light. But it's particularly about light and dark. So it's starlight, or it's candlelight. There's a candle maker, or there's a lot of fire in different ways as well.
You know, I've been having a conversation with someone recently about if Muckle Flugga was to become, say, a big stage play, what would be its arc? Outside of the dialogue, what would be its theatrical arc? And we decided upon the light, because, you know, it's the light of the lighthouse. There's this beautiful jellyfish bloom in it. The northern lights make an appearance. There's a lot of fire in it as well. So we've got this aesthetic of the light going through it. And it becomes this sort of, the voice of the island is the voice of the light, whether it's astral or lunar or flame based, and it's this sort of story in the undertow of the story. It's a really interesting way to see how theatre minds articulate the sort of hidden narrative of it all.
The storytelling aspect within the book and over the wider sort of arc of your work is interesting to me, because so often you have reflected on the romance of friendship, particularly male friendship, boyfriends, oyster, again, back to the salt water and the sea water, isn't it, with something like that, and your collaboration with Scott.
That was also about cunnilingus a little bit.
But it is, you know, there's that aspect of you revisiting, retelling stories. RLS does it within. There's a point where he visits Zeus and he tells him, he wants to tell him a story about Chicago again. And every time you retell a story, you tell it in a slightly different way. And I speak to a lot of songwriters, someone like Ricky Ross from Deacon Blue. I know he loves you. He called him a genius. He said you're a genius. And he'll quite often say to me, you know, in one way I keep trying to write the same song. I keep trying to write the best love song, or I keep trying to write this thing that I'm trying to articulate about life or love or friendship where you are. And, you know, that idea of retelling it obviously is fascinating for you in poetry, in prose, and now in fiction. And it comes back to the same sort of fascination with this love affair, really, between people. Yeah, it's particularly boys.
It's definitely the trope that joins all of my work together, is this fast fire, romantic, all-consuming friendship. All of the different manifestations of friendship. The friend's arms will fall into when we're broken-hearted. And, you know, a lot of my favourite literature exists in those sort of gonzo realms in between. Some of my favourite poetry is prose poetry, and some of my favourite prose is poetic prose, and where do those two sort of overlap? And it's the same. Fiction now is birthing up all these genres of auto-fiction or biographical fiction, and where we take a true life story and we obfuscate some of the details and we mix with the ingredients of it all. So I feel like the sort of genreification of literature is dissolving into itself in this beautiful way. And the novel is such a big picnic hamper of a basket. You can Trojan horse poetry in there. You can fling in newspaper excerpts. I was digging up, you know, some of the little snippets from Robert Louis Stevenson's real letters. I got out the archive of the National Library of Scotland. So there's so much you can put into there. Like, the novel is just this big holder. It's the king of the literary orgy. There you go.
That's one for the annals. But within that, you can literally, there's one point, Us is a wonderful knitter. And it's just this like knitting with conviction. I'm just like, I'm here for that. There's a whole lot packed into those three words.
I'm also obsessed with knitwear, as you know. I love cardigans, I love jumpers, and, you know, Shetland Fair Isle, the Orkney, they're amongst the world leaders when it comes to knitwear. In fact, I made a bit of a sort of blunder at one point in the knitwear world. When I was doing this amazing, I've been chuffed to chat about this book with so many incredible human beings, yourself included, and this is our like sequel time doing that. And another special one for me was Stephen Fry. I got to speak to him down at Hay Festival. He's been such a beautiful supporter and ambassador from my work, from the poetry to the non-fiction. He almost wrote us a foreword for Boyfriends, and a quote from his is on my first ever poetry collection. He gave me it before it was even published, just to like galvanize me and push me forward. So eventually I did this big event with him at Hay, where he's the president of the festival, and I got heckled during it. There was a guy, when I said Shetland, Fair Isle and Orkney are the world leaders, I said that was a bold statement when it comes to knitwear. A big gentleman, he stood up and he said, no, we're number one. I am from Norway. So midway through me trying to like be soppy with Stephen, I get heckled by Beyond the Bear trying to stake the claim to the knitwear front. And let's face it, they're in our shop. I've spoken out of turn there. So ever since then, I've said Shetland Fair and Orkney are amongst the world leaders. And I actually rewarded myself. The Shetland show was at the tail end of the tour. I had to, grease the wheels before going up there. As an Edinburgh writer who's written a Shetland novel, I had to really raise my gusto like a storm to get there. And I rewarded myself after the couple of shows we did there with a piece of Shetlandic knitwear.
Yeah, it was time.
It was time.
It was time. You were
time to. It's a big
knitted
investment,
to the landscape.
but that's what book advances are for. The rent can wait. There's jumpers to be bought.
There's real decadence to be had.
Yeah.
Wherever you go, the idea of animals and nature. I mean, there's so many ways that I love the book, and one of them is the nature writing within it, the absolute fascination and meticulous looking at something like a blade of grass, and this idea that ostensibly. And I think you even write it at some point, Us and the father live simple but complicated lives. And it is that, again, it's this dalliance, isn't it, between our day-to-day, but also the absolute magic of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a unique location to be in. And also the folklore of Muckle Flugga and Outstack, its neighbouring islands, is in fact, they were formed off the result of two warring giants that lived up in Shetland called Herman and Saxa, that were always trying to argue with each other, full of like bravado and sort of machismo pomp. And during one of their biggest arguments, they lobbed these two boulders into the ocean to demonstrate their brawn to a beautiful mermaid that was swimming by. And those two biggest rocks became Muckle Flugga and Outstack. So there was so much folklore and magicalism and fantasticalism in the nature there that as an Edinburgh writer that was writing a book about Shetland, it had to also be a love letter to the landscape, to the ocean around there, to the bird life, to the flora and the fauna. It had to show my respect and reverence from this place that I didn't grow up, yet I was in awe of each time I've went up there. The end of that story with the giants, actually, it goes beyond that. The Shetlandic folklore version of it says this mermaid's actually catcalling. Miss Mermaid's actually a vicious temptress and is distracting these giants from, breaking boulders off their heads. And eventually she capitulates, she relents, and she says, look, you two just keep shouting at me. I've had enough of this. My gaze is actually, they're catcalling her, and she just wants to be left alone to swim those waters. And she says, right, first one that swims to the North Pole with me and gets there first after me, because let's face it, I'm going to win, can have my hand in marriage, and let's be done with you throwing boulders to try and impress me. So both the giants are very much up for that. Clonk their heads together and go thrashing into the ocean, limbs spaghettiing around everywhere, and then suddenly remember that neither of them can swim, and they both sink to the bottom of the ocean and drown. And Us, the lighthouse keeper's son, thinks that's the most romantic story he's ever heard, and I'm inclined to agree. Yeah.
Let's talk about the women in the book, okay? Because the mother is such a huge presence by virtue of her absence, particularly.
Yeah, that's the thing. Even though it is this sort of tug of war between these three male characters, the sort of sapience and the erudition that the mother's left behind makes the father and Us want to be better human beings. Every quest that they're setting themselves is to live up to the expectations that she's left behind. And Firth has also lost his mother. It's actually one of the things that pulls them so closely together. They both want to be the best versions of themselves so they can do honour to those people that they miss completely, and they're trying to sort of recharacterize themselves in their absence. And the mother's absence very much is kilted across the sky, improving the environment there and actually stopping the father really losing the full ferocity of his temper, or stopping Us not being as patient with the father. Her absence gentles over and sort of oxidizes the wound into a better place because her memory is so strong and so spirited. And then there's another character, Figgy, who's the sort of local storekeeper, and really has taken a guardian role with both Oos and the father and the island. She orbits around it, looking in on them. She's a nurturer and a caregiver, and we learn a bit about her backstory as well. So there's these sort of matriarch figures making these men so much better versions of themselves and being so tolerant with them all throughout the novel, and in such a sort of symphonically subtle fashion compared to their cock swinging.
Yeah, quite.
Metaphorically.
And I guess also she's an interesting reflection on the different ways you explore masculinity, but also vulnerability, especially between us and the father, because they're both, the father is racked, is devastated and is grieving, but you push him to quite far extremes and toward violence. I don't want to get too much away, but but in a way, the more you push him there, the more we see the shame and the vulnerability that's they can coexist. It's that duality again, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. These are all like broken human beings, but they think they're doing the right thing. They think they've got somebody else's best intentions to mind, and that they know the answer. So nobody's trying to do anything to nefariously harm everyone. If they harm people, it's by accident, and it's by sort of ricochet and consequence in that way. And the father is, I guess, the most at his most childish when he lets himself be vulnerable, but he's so ashamed of it. We all carry so many vulnerabilities about. Politicians, commercial agents, advertisers, they focus on that pulls us apart, that makes us feel distant from each other. But actually, if we owned up to our vulnerabilities and wore them open-heartedly, we see the amount of commonhoods that bring us together and the things that unify us. And actually, in the most part, the things that pull us apart are quite minuscule in comparison to those. But people are trying to fearmonger us into putting those into the periphery, into hiding those away, because there's no money to be made. There's no political agenda to be run often by pulling us together through our vulnerabilities. And these characters, they all have a kindred spirit in the vulnerabilities that they're heaving around, but they won't, for the love of sort of heaven or earth, let each other see them.
No. Even they'll turn their backs. They will not want to see. They will avoid each other. And the misunderstandings then are so rife as well. And everyone's just trying to get along. It's never that easy. Yeah. It's also a love letter to Edinburgh. Yeah. Because Muckle Flugga, of course, is where a great deal of this, again, no spoilers, but, it's very much about the wonder and lure and possibilities of Old Ricky as well, isn't it?
Yeah, Stevenson's dad and uncle, before Robert Louis Stevenson was Robert Louis Stevenson, he had 3 generations of lighthouse engineers and designers above him. And he walked away from that family profession to try and be a dilettante writer that they told him would never work out. Of course, it didn't go that way. And now he, in Scotland, is who we know as Stevenson, and the lighthouse engineers sort of take a second place. But they were these really formidable family that engineered, designed and delivered over 200 lighthouses that bejewel the coastline, save all these lives. And Stevenson sort of came to a head with it in Edinburgh, where he was brought up. It's where he walked away from the lighthouse profession. It's where he gave up on God, apparently, when he was at university. And Oos is feeling like he might need to go to Edinburgh. This was never a story about somebody who had to leave an island to be more complete. He just had to leave the island to do the type of things that he needed to do. He couldn't flourish there creatively. And it's about people. The gulf between him and the father might never let him explore that. So Edinburgh is this sort of pale, distant light that is both enticing and terrifying to him. And he's trying to get a straight answer out of Robert Louis Stevenson about whether he thinks it's a great city, whether he thinks he should go there, whether he would work out there. And Stevenson, of course, just spins him in circles, as right he should. But Edinburgh is also just orbiting out there in the distance. Firth is running away from it, yet he's pulled back to it at the same time. And it's so different from what Oos knows. He loves that island. He's deeply connected with it. It makes him everything. Every sort of sentient cell in his body is because of Muckle Flugga, and he's terrified that if he leaves there, it'll be like cutting an umbilical cord, and he'll be lost in the wilderness without it.
Yeah. Stevenson has kind of run circles around you to some extent as well, hasn't he? Because there have been so many different ways in which his work has informed and influenced and shaped what you've done and even where you've gone to some extent.
Yeah, you know, I didn't intend it to be that case though. Well, when I was wee, my mum was a nursery nurse in Leith, and actually my first memory of poetry is she used to take those Child's Garden of Verses, Robert Louis Stevenson poems, and put them to music, and she'd work with a lot of the kids that had behavioural difficulties and weren't fitting in with the rest of the class, and would do this something akin to music therapy with the poems and the rhythms and the cadence. So I remember these poems really early on, dancing around, and I guess they lit a fuse in my mind about where language could take us into those emotional realms, how we could parachute into someone else's life so quickly via this like exquisitely put together local yet universal parcel of words. And then years later, I read the Stevenson books and I was sort of into them, but I was more into Goosebumps and I was more into Tolkien, and then I got, you know, into the Harry Potter books, and I was sort of sucked into that. And then I won the Robert Louis Stevenson Prize years later. Scotland used to do this amazing residency in a place near the Fontainebleau Forest in France, in a little place called Grès-sur-Léon, which was an old artist colony, and it's where Stevenson met his wife-to-be Fanny Osborne. And they used to give you this old sort of hotel, chateau, castle with another couple of residents for a month. You'd win a prize, you'd get some money. It was a beautiful award. And I got given it, and I got to go out there and swan around being a fancy as fuck writer for a month, and really sort of feeling like this was the biggest plaudit I'd ever been given. And then I felt indebted to Stevenson. I thought, I've not read enough of your work, and because you were so good at doing what you do, I'm here with my, you know, feeling as empowered as I've ever felt as a writer. So I then saw an obligation to revisit his work. But I really quickly got distracted by his non-fiction writing, his letters. He's one of the best literary letter keepers in modern history. You know, there's 8 volumes of these bastards, about 500 pages a pop. So I would recommend reading some of the summary versions and not working through them. But the main ones that I adored were these friendship love letters between him and J.M. Barrie, who went on to write Peter Pan. Just the mentorial support they gave to each other, the way that they would sort of emotionally support each other as they were questing out into the literary world. And then there was some brilliant bitchy gossip in there as well.
Was there?
They declared their love to each other. If you were but a woman, ...
Really?
I must confess I love you. So there's a lot of hidden meaning in there as well. And it's those friendship letters that I quote the most in the book. So Also, Stevenson went to university to study law after leaving engineering. It was a sort of amicable negotiation with him and his family. I was the first one from a huge family to go to university, and we came to this amicable negotiation. I'd study law. And then both of us disowned the profession for the rascalish, rapscallion profession of being a writer. So I'm not saying I'm the modern incarnation of Stevenson, but if you guys were to push that motion...
Who's to say? You mentioned Jack Lowden doing the audiobook, and I wondered about what that's been like, because you mentioned even like a voice or an accent, or you're hearing the character slightly differently. So has that shed a sort of different light, because it's giving someone else's perspective and shining a light back on those characters from where they are.
Yeah, you know, I've done a lot of my audiobooks myself. I did Boyfriends. I've done some of the poetry. I guess because they're so biographical, it would be a bit discombobulating to hear it in someone else's voice. But with Muckle Flugga, there's so many different characters, different age range, different voices, that I would have, quite frankly, delivered a very uncomfortable experience of that audiobook. It wouldn't have been pleasant for anyone. So we made a little short list between me and Faber, and Jack was pretty much up the top of it. And I knew he'd love Boyfriends. We'd had a chat about it, and we'd zoomed about some other writing stuff. And he agreed to do it, having not even read the book.
Really?
And I think if you're going to get someone else to do the audiobook, make sure they're younger, more talented, more handsome, and more famous than you. And Jack ticks all those boxes. And also, one of the roles he's most known for is River Cartwright in Slow Horses. So he's also got the water-based name, which fitted into my theme.
Totally.
So it was perfect.
So, and what was it like when you then re-encountered
I loved it. Yeah, I mean, it was so different to the way that I would read it, but so brilliant. I'm already trying to copy his RLS voice pretty well. I'm butchering it, but he, you know, he did an exceptional job. But it was amazing. He felt like he inhabited the novel, but I knew he would. You know, I've loved his screen performances. I saw him play this amazing. There was a big Hollywood film of Siegfried Sassoon. And it was called Benediction and the War Poet, and he played him in the movies. He was amazing in Dunkirk. He was so good in Mary Queen of Scots, but he was also brilliant on stage. I'd seen The Fifth Step, the play was in, and I knew he had that sort of theatrical vivaciousness. I knew he had quite a dark sense of humour, and his voice isn't too dissimilar to mine as well. So
quite.
yeah,
but
so
I think especially because you do read so much yourself and perform so much of your own work, poetry, prose. We've had some tapas readings, of course. It's just really interesting that even the intonation is different. You know, that's fascinating to me, the way in which I didn't realise that I know your spoken voice and your performance voice enough that I think I read in your lilt when I read the book. So it's fascinating then to hear someone else doing it, because it's not retelling the story, but it's just shifting the perspective a little bit again, isn't it?
And you know, that's the closest I've ever got to being able to experience one of my books as a reader.
Sure.
Because it's such a long piece of fiction and it was someone else's voice that I would forget in brief moments that I'd actually written it and was just engaged in the story. And that's when I knew he'd done an exceptional job, because I disappeared out of it, even to myself sometimes. And I think you develop an identity as a writer. Certainly I've got a pretty quirky, pretty, you know, florid, pretty verbose, all-consuming way of writing. People will either really take to it or, you know, it'll sink their ship.
How apt.
And I think you're continually in conversation with yourself, but you just want to keep getting better. And there is this notion of betterment, of improving the storytelling, of the depth of meaning, of continuing the conversation into new sort of deeper, more emotionally laden realms. And provided I'm sort of safe in the belief that we're covering distance in terms of sort of human compassion and kindness and all of the complicated emotions we carry inside us, if provided that compass continues to steer it, then I feel like it's the right piece of writing for me to be throwing myself into. Because you'll only write so many books in your life, you know, and I really labour over every sentence in them. You chisel away at them like poetry, so you just have to have so much faith and belief that you want to keep talking to yourself in that fashion. Also that it's universal enough that very quickly, despite the locality, despite your stereotypes and preferences, a reader can pick that up, parachute their own life into it, take hold of those experiences and feel seen or less lonely because of it.
Yeah. Well, that's testament to the fact that this has been, you know, translated into various sort of languages you can maybe, because it's so rooted in a very specific place, and yet, my goodness me, it's universal. What happens to the title when it's translated?
It goes cleaner bam. So it just came out in Germany as let's say Leutrum, which is the last lighthouse. It comes out in France later in the year as La Phare de l'Impossible, the Impossible Lighthouse. It comes out in Spain this summer as well. They're about to get back to me on the title, having finished translating it. And it comes out in Italy next year. And again, I'm waiting to hear. Muckle Flugga is not making it into any of the international territory. The first one was the German translation, and I thought maybe we'll get away with it there. It's Old Norse. It sounds a bit Germanic to me in terms of the shapes that it takes in your mouth. And as soon as it fell in Germany, I thought it doesn't stand a fucking chance anyway.
So the last lighthouse and the Impossible
Lighthouse, which I do call Muckle Flugga at different times in the book. Its nickname was the Impossible Lighthouse, and it got described as, you know, in the book as the Last Giant. So they've taken what I've done and just made it a bit more universal. But
it's a bit like the Jack Lowden thing. It's fascinating, isn't it? Just looking at it slightly, just shift it slightly and see how it's encapsulated. It just grows.
It's beautiful. You write this story and then it comes out in hardback and paperback, and then the translations come out, and it just keeps sprawling on. And each one's this new opportunity to connect with people and sort of re-clarify nuances of the book. And I'm just really soppily grateful for it all.
God, well, as am I, as are we, I'm sure. And thank you so much, first of all, to the Bookmonger and Michael Pedersen for being amazing. Let's have another round cheer. Did you want to do any more readings? Have you finished with your readings?
I was going to do one poem to finish.
Yep, we would love that.
Also, I think it'd be a sort of betrayal of my position, having, you know, written 3 collections of poetry, prided myself on being a poet, and then betraying it for the fictionary world. Not to do something under these circumstances, especially as I'm still wearing my Edinburgh makar hat. in Glasgow. I quite like the Edinburgh makar lives in Glasgow. Don't tell Edinburgh City Council that.
This is getting sent straight to them. Shocked.
So last year I got a beautiful invitation one morning and I got offered to be the UK Poetry Ambassador for Independent Bookshop Week, which happens in June, and it's a celebration of all of the incredible bookshops we have around us, the people they bring together, the talks they put on, the salvation they offer us, the stories they foment, the incredible people that make them happen. And it was such a beautiful thing to get commissioned to write a love letter to your favourite indie bookshops and to travel around that week and do various readings. So I thought I would end by doing that short poem since we were in this emporium of wonder. So this one's for the bookmonger. It's called Lines on Glister and Glow. When a shooting star crashes to earth, it becomes a bookshop. Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious spelled backwards is dear bookshops, you are the sugar. Och yes, the dream's not without some drama. But what writer worth their salt hasn't been tutted at for sneaking their wares onto those pucker top pick spots? Or being guilty of taking every freebie offered, even on strictly only browsing days because the to-be-read piles growing taller than organ music and that billionaire's guilty conscience. Eek, that's nowt compared to my mum's rogue antics, leafing through the poetry section just to announce, that's my boy, to anyone in earshot. The book raised up like a chalice as onlookers gawp, gripe, and yes, panic. A question. Is there a more glorious emporium of wonder to be caddish in than a bookshop? Answer, hard no. That said, I am sorry bookshops, but suffice to say, it's never not fawning. I never don't carol shop local and shop indie like I'm chanting the chorus of an anthemic pop banger. And I've not stopped worshipping at your literary altars since I first found my metal mottling behind the strong wooden beams, all bookshops. I've taken to weeping at your artsy window displays, taken to rejoicing at your skin trillingly thrilling in-store readings. I'm aware the jury's still out on this one. Taken to oversharing with your brigade of brilliant booksellers only to be rewarded with hot literary gossip. I've found refuge in your real and imagined parlours purring like a wet cat scarfed around human legs as a tin of kippers opens. After all, to be gifted books and gift books in return is one of life's greatest pleasures. When a shooting star crashes to earth, well, you'll know it by the way it glows.
Ah, Michael Pedersen. Charged by starlight. Jack Loudon, eat your heart out, by the way. That was perfect. Thank you again. Thank you so much. Thanks to the wonderful bookmonger. And thanks to you for coming.
And thank you so much to Nicola. She's such an ambassador for the arts, and to host and chair and invest yourself in these events the way she does is such a real boon to have someone so culturally brilliant and generous with her time as Nicola in Scotland.
And he didn't even read his notes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks again to the wonderful Bookmonger in Bearsden. They are amazing. The best wine, the best charcuterie boards, the best books. Obviously, go see them. And yes, thank you as always to Michael Pedersen for just being the best company, the best and the kindest and the wisest writer as well. Muckle Flugga is out in paperback now. Michael's at Edinburgh International Book Festival with various wonderful guests and various former Kick Up the Arts favourites and wonders, including Gordon Buchanan and Holly McNish. I'll put a link to all the dates online. And yes, I'll be there too, hosting various parties in the book festival's Spiegel tent. Come for a Kick Up the Arts with live music and conversation from Catherine Joseph, Kirsten Innes and Loman Campbell. That's on August the 25th. I'm also variously across that week in conversation with the Beta Band Steve Mason, Val McDermott, Justin Curry and Grant McPhee. I'll tell you more about all of that soon. And I am back with the Bookmonger and Damian Barr. That's on September the 25th. It's going to be at the Royal College in St Vincent Street in Glasgow. And before all that though, if you're in or you're near Erskine, I'm in conversation with Nicola Sturgeon about her memoir Frankly. That's at Erskine Arts thanks to the Ginger Cat Bookshop, and that's on the 2nd of August. In the meantime, thank you as always for listening, for sharing, for getting in touch, for coming along to the live events. Please do. Bye for now.